Welcome to Paranormal Latte Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Kelly Renee Schutz. Sit back and relax with us. Grab yourself a really good drink. Spend an hour and let's delve into a world of chatter about the mysteries of the unexplained. Whether you are a skeptic or a believer makes no difference. It's not always in your imagination. Enjoy your day. Now that was good. We are broadcasting on the United Public Radio and UFO Paranormal Radio Networks 105.3 FM from the Gulf Coast and 107.7 FM in New Orleans. The views and opinions expressed by the host and guests do not necessarily reflect those of the audience, United Public Radio and UFO Paranormal Radio Networks, its hosts, affiliates, and or Paranormal Latte Podcast, Paranormal Universal Press LLC, and Diamond Point Entertainment LLC. This show is pre-recorded. Ah, now that was good. Good day, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Paranormal Latte Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Kelly Renee Schutz. As we spend an hour together, don't forget to grab yourself something to sip on while we settle back together for an hour in this variety show. Being this is my first show on this network, I would like to give a quick thank you to the producers who brought me aboard. This is a pre-recorded syndicated show. I hope to design it in a way that gives you a variety of segments each week that include a taste of chatter, a splash of guests, the warmth of stories, the intrigue of topics, and of course all sprinkled with silly quirks and some soothing music. Now, does that sound good? The visual of this show can be seen on the United Radio Public and UFO Radio Network YouTube and Facebook pages, as well as heard on several popular platforms. So let's get on with the show. Being the show will be a bit different in its format each week, I felt it would be appropriate and a good foundation for you to get to know who your host is first. Yep, namely me. But before we jump in, let's take a brief moment here to hear a smooth sounding tune, and then we'll be right back. Stay tuned. Welcome back. So let's take a moment here to get to know your host. Some of you have listened to or watched a few of my programs over the years, and some of you are just now tuning in and getting acquainted. Well, let's start from the beginning. I fell into my life as a podcaster in 2016. Years ago, I didn't even know what a podcast was. My careers up until then and retirement were service jobs, management, college instruction, and law. My life living with the secret that I was experiencing something unexplained placed me in what I call the paranormal closet. I had no one I could talk to about my unusual experiences, and as they began to grow, change, and evolve, I soon found myself in a situation where I couldn't hold things in much longer. As a professional college instructor working at many different colleges and universities, I couldn't say anything, and I taught on a campus, one campus, that was very haunted with a dark history. And it just so happens they, as in apparitions still hanging around the campus, well, guess what? they eventually found me, and I began to have experiences that were very difficult at times to explain to my students while teaching in my classroom. Usually I had to pass things off as this or that just to save face, but I reached a point where I couldn't excuse what I saw happening in my classroom much longer. I remained quiet for a very long time. I then reached a point where I started to journal my experiences and published my first book. My reasons for doing so were quite therapeutic in nature, but it was also to find out if anyone else could relate to my stories and my experiences. That book was noticed by a now celebrity in this field, and I was invited onto his show to share my stories, but I thought this person was some heavy metal dude just wanting to make fun of me. After all, I had never heard of a paranormal podcast back in 2016, and apparently there were 10 to 20,000 different podcasts going on worldwide at that time. However, when that interview came, I took control of it, and I decided no one was going to make me look like a fool. And so I didn't even give the gentleman an opportunity to ask very many questions because I was absolutely terrified of being looked at as if I didn't know what I was talking about. It just so happens 3 million listeners listened that night. It was a very credible radio station. The hosts were held in high regard and esteem, and I felt rather foolish once I found this out. At that point, others reached out and invited me to have my own radio show on their stations, and to this day I remain on several platforms and for the past 4 years have been a professional TV network host on a network called PARAFlixx Paranormal Plus, where you can watch me interview guests every weekend. My life that used to be all management, teaching, and law transformed overnight into my being a professional podcaster and being on several networks now, not just one and not just two, but several, and being heard weekly by people around the world intrigued about the paranormal and or otherworldly experiences. In looking back at my life, I would call myself a citizen researcher, someone who studies herself when unexplained happenings occur. And to date and never ending, I have had over 100 plus paranormal and 3 to 4 perceived otherworldly visitations. Just about the time I think everything has come to its end, another occurrence would take place, surprising me and forcing me to consider writing yet another book. I am now on my 12th book of experiences, and as of this show, in less than a couple weeks, I will be publishing, yes, that 12th book called Phenomena, Unexplained Happenings. This book will continue on with some of my most compelling personal stories with evidence and will also add additional features, explanations, and observations. I'll let you know when that book is officially published. Writing and sharing about my paranormal stories have become my therapy, or I should say, perhaps, my therapies. Since my first podcast show in 2016, the questions that still come to mind are, how do I know when I'm getting closer to getting any answers? Have I? Well, no, and I still haven't stopped trying to find answers. I have been through hypnotic regressions, interviewed hundreds of guests, continue to experience some very unexpected happenings, and my goal is to make sense out of these happenings and why they keep happening in my life. Can you relate to anything that I've said to this point? Well, if you are interested, by chance, go to my website at www.paranormal-otherworldly.com www.paranormaluniversalpress.com, take a moment and glance over some of my most unusual happenings. This brings me to my abilities. People ask me all the time, do you have abilities? Well, yes, I do. So I didn't start to recognize that I had abilities until I began to look back over time, erase the notion that it was all in my imagination, and began to pick myself apart and put myself back together to figure out what has happened to me. I do have psi abilities, such as experiencing acts of unexplained consciousness, telepathy, all the clairs, such as clairvoyance, occasionally seeing into the future, but not on command, clairsentient, where I'm an empath or having the ability to feel other people's emotions and or sensations and vibes, clairaudient, which is hearing sounds that a person cannot always hear regularly, clairgustance, which is tasting and smelling things, psychokinesis, which is the movement of objects, telekinesis, which is the movement of objects from being afar, and of course always being on as a sensitive empath. And I also need to mention that I have a great effect on electronics. I have an effect with electronics in many different ways. Let's talk a minute about this field. So right now it remains a pseudoscience, which means situations that cannot be recreated in a lab, but we do have, and we have collected evidence. And I have collected evidence. The biggest challenge about science, though, is that science cannot explain everything. Yes, I am a doctor. I am an educator, doctor, and yet I have also a strong law background. Not an actual lawyer, just background as a paralegal, and in some cases, undercover paralegal. Through studies, I was able to write up measurable results. This is when I was a college professor. You can't measure something that happens quickly, and most importantly, you cannot oftentimes recreate it. And you do not always get the same situation to happen over and over again when you are attempting to seek something out. Or are we causing these moments ourselves? Let's talk a little bit about residual hauntings. Residual hauntings are often known as replays of sounds or visual moments. Intelligent hauntings, though, is when something of an energy nature acts as if it can convince you that it's there right with you in some type of form. In other words, what it is seems to remain earthbound and goes about its own time and life and or whatever until someone might enter its territory, which may cause it to stir itself up and make itself known to that person. I have encountered over 100 different types of situations in my life, and things such as being kicked up into the air by an angry ghost, touched, channeled, levitated, marked, choked, moving objects, put into trances, and my most recent hide and seek, but my most recent traumatic, almost being run over by a car without a driver. And that story I'm going to save for you to the end of this podcast. My experiences have been a flavor of terror, very mild and sometimes startling. Never to the point of hurting me, but scaring me out of my living mind? Yes. I have also been miraculously healed by something unseen during a number of situations. My list goes on and on. So my question continues to be, what exactly am I experiencing? Ask yourself this same question. Are you experiencing something that you can't always explain? Are you experiencing something that torments you or just startles you or just lets you know that it's there? Well, I have experienced what I believe to be the spiritual, the paranormal, and the otherworldly. However, I am not always sure I'm giving credit to the right source. As far as some of my abilities with electronics, that started when I was around the age of 3, 4, and 5, by the way, but didn't recognize it at that time. Those that believe in otherworldly presences would go the route that I was abducted and taught how to manipulate to win at casino slot machines, open elevator doors without touching a button, turn TVs on and off, and cause sparks to fly out of objects, namely a camera, namely a TV. Others would tell me that my brain waves have changed over time due to traumatic experiences I have experienced in my life, causing me to open up a sixth sense and a third eye. And for the fourth time in a row, I have predicted the winning horses for the Kentucky Derby. However, only when I've seen the horse for less than 10 seconds. When I'm very, very tired and very, very drained, I notice that I can predict winners, sports plays, what is being said on TV, and anything else that miraculously comes to me to prove to me that there is some type of connection. They say we all have abilities. Do you have abilities? What are your abilities? When did you start noticing that you have abilities? They say that we can all do what I can do. However, some of us seem to be a little bit better at it than others, and some of us are a little bit slow at coming into our awakening for whatever reason that might be. And there are some that will never, ever experience a ghost, an apparition, anything otherworldly. I used to be jealous of those people. Now I can't turn it off. When you get an embedded handprint onto your chest over an area that was never to heal, now healed, you might want to think twice about that. Yep, that happened to me. And then for the next several months, I was on a mission to figure out who put that handprint on my body. It did come to me in a dream, and I will share that story with you at another time in this program. But just for a moment, think about some of the things that may have happened to you that seem almost a bit unreal. And as I go along, I will share my stories with you, hopefully intrigue you about some of the unusual, maybe even creepy, or even shocking experiences while and when I get awakened. I always tease everyone and say, yep, I'm a lighthouse on Bright Pulse 24/7 with a gift shop that is closed most of the day. I attract what I cannot see unless I have the aid of a camera or an infrared recorder. My frequency to experience things around me, near me, by me, or whatever becomes activated when I'm feeling very low energy, dead tired, or somewhat depressed. I cannot always predict, move things, and experience on command, but I can do these things, and I have done these things for the past several years. But I often wonder, am I creating these situations myself, or is something watching me from afar or even close, and doing these to prove to myself that there's other things out there that we cannot always explain? I have had some of the most interesting experiences, and some of them so unbelievable it's hard to talk about them. And I will share my story at some point about the ghost driver that purposely, and it was obvious, it was after me, trying to run me over. There's only been a couple of cases that I know of where a car without a driver went out of control, and it was obvious they were trying to run over someone that they wanted to, of course, run over. I was just recently filmed for a movie on that very, very situation, and I will share that with you as we go along. Terrifying? Yes. Puzzling? Yes. Why am I targeted? Don't know. Am I targeted in a negative way? Not always. It just seems like whatever is around me knows that I know something is out there. Yep, experiences are definitely experiences. And if they are real to you, then they are real. There's no convincing anyone about what we encounter in our worldview, because everybody encounters and perceives something differently. Only stories and situations brought to the attention of others who say, yep, something about that sounds awfully familiar, is when you have met part of your community. But where do we go with these encounters? Where do they come from? What are behind these occurrences? And most importantly, why do they keep happening to some of us but not all? All of this remains a debate and mystery. Okay, on that note, let's enjoy just another sip together and take a short break. And when we come back, let me tell you a little bit more about how my journey began as a youngster, and perhaps to many of you, my story that will ultimately and has touched the world. Stay tuned. Welcome back. In this segment, I'm going to take you on a journey with me back in time. And hopefully by the time I'm done with this journey, some ideas or thoughts might be popping into your head. My journey might have begun before the age of 3. And so you think about a lot of these things and you're like, oh, malarkey. But to me, it's not malarkey, because I live with stuff that I believe was caused by traumatic experiences. But now I'm not so sure. So around the age of 3 to 5, I was having dreams, and I can remember some of them actually to this day. A lot of the dreams that I had involved war situations. Actually, I could see this individual running and who got shot in the back, and I believe that person might have been me. I don't know. Airline crashes, civil unrest, you name it, it was negative. I dreamt about it. But when you're a young kid like that, you want to just go into your living room and watch cartoons. You don't think about all of this other stuff because you feel you are being protected by your parents, and whatever goes on in the world around you, they'll take care of it, and you can just go about your day. So, any of you out there, can you relate to the box black and white televisions that we grew up with a long time ago? Well, we had one, but it wasn't always on cartoons, or I would go in to watch cartoons and something like a breaking news would come over the airwaves. Very interesting though, because I would stand there and I would look at the TV and I would see on TV exactly what I dreamt in my dream. Now this is a 3, 4, 5-year-old recollecting this stuff from the night before. It just didn't happen like a dream occurred and then this situation happened. No, it's you go to bed, you dream it, and then you wake up and you see it. And that became the story of my young life. So much so that I didn't want to watch cartoons anymore, and I didn't want to see what was going on the television, because believe it or not, I thought I was the one causing these situations. I do recall telling my mother about the fact that I thought it was a little odd that I just dreamt that in my dream. I saw that, but there was never a reaction from her about that. There's probably many reasons why, but I do recall growing up where things were either spiritual or they were, I don't want to use the word demonic, but something negative. And that's what we were taught in our religion classes. We never learned of anything in between. We never learned that there could be some other energies around us that we weren't understanding or were never explained. That didn't happen back in my day. Nope, not at all. So I began to think about over time why I might have been causing these situations to happen on TV. And of course, I had no answers because I didn't know how all of this worked. But when I reached the age of around, I would say 11, 12, 13, 14, that age range, there did come a time when I would wonder about the fact that I was thinking about my genetics. Believe it or not, yes. Because I noticed that I could predict things that were going to happen to people at my school, and I'm talking about individuals that were kind of brought to my attention or I observed, and I could think to myself that something is going to happen and this is going to happen, and as a result this is going to happen. Well, guess what? It happened. And so then I was trying to figure out why nobody else could seem to pick up on either the observations or the things that were going on that would bring it to that type of conclusion. So I concluded that I must have been given a really good set of genetics. I know it sounds crazy, but that is exactly what I thought, compared to my peers and other people, including older people. So now I'm thinking to myself, well, I've got really good genetics. I can predict and see things that are going to happen to people. But I didn't know if that was anything along the clairvoyance line, or if that was just a strong intuition, or just things were really actually too obvious. I didn't know. So that was my little secret that I kept to myself. I have better genetics than most of the people around me. All right, let's fast forward again. Between the ages of like 14, 15, 16, something around that age range, I recall going over to my paternal, which was my father's parents, my grandparents' home, which was in a rural, very rural community, small community, but my great-grandfather had built on that land. My great-grandfather came from Norway. He was on the boat as a 2-year-old. Many people died on the boat coming over from Norway to the United States to try to find a better life for themselves. I have been recently over to Norway, and I can tell you it's absolutely beautiful, and I don't know why anyone would want to leave it. But back then, people were starving, and they just needed to find a living. So they did this. They got on the boat, and by the thousands, and they came on over to the United States from all different places in the world. Okay, so my great-grandfather had built this Dutch colonial home. Absolutely spectacular, one of its kind, just beautiful, and premier in the county. However, to a young child, that Dutch colonial home looked a little spooky, and everything around it, the older trees, sometimes they let the grass grow a little bit too tall. Weeds, they raised, it was a hobby farm, and they raised their own meat, and they also, grew corn and the whole 10 yards. They did everything that they did when, his dad was growing up, who also came over and is my great-great-grandfather, from Norway. Long story short, there was one day when I was just outside this house, and my dad was visiting inside the house, and I had recalled, and I don't know how it came up, a conversation with some of my classmates that they had seen a ghost. They knew what a ghost was. They had a ghost in their house. They've seen a ghost. Yeah, and I became very jealous of that, because I thought, you know what? Why can't I see a ghost? What does a ghost look like? What is a ghost? Well, to a child, a ghost looks like something more translucent but in human form. That's what a young child thinks a ghost looks like. They never think for a moment that it could be invisible energy or anything along that line. Nope, that's not what we're looking for. So I started and didn't realize that I started manifesting at that age. I used to say, I wish I could see a ghost. I want to see a ghost on this property. I wish a ghost would walk right in front of me right now so I can at least say I saw one. But I never, ever, ever, at that point, ever saw a ghost. All right, so now I'm manifesting, which is making wishes that, by the way, all came true on their own time years later. So now this is what's going through my head. Why can't I see something? And what's wrong with me? And I can predict behavior, but I can't seem to get past this, and everyone's bragging. And so anyway, between the ages of going back to 9 to 17 on my maternal mother's side, my grandparents lived in a house that was built around 1890. And to a child, it's a house. It's, to an older person, it may look like an older type home that has been around a while. But to a child, it's just a house, okay? But it wasn't just any house. This house is where I went after school when they were on errands, and I would start sensing, feeling, and having experiences in this house that I simply could not explain. Let me give you an example. Have you ever been asleep and you wake up, you're kind of groggy, and you think you've heard something? And in my case, they were gone on errands. I was on the couch sleeping, waiting for them to come home. This is my grandparents one day, and I heard a lot of chattering in the kitchen. And I thought to myself, how did they get here into the house without me hearing the door open and all that? So I got up thinking that they were all in the kitchen, and I just started walking in a groggy manner to the kitchen. Now, I have to point something out because I just thought about it. Now, in the other segment, I talked about how I activate and I become very good at what I do when I'm dead tired. There is a connection there with me being dead tired, groggy, out of it. Can any of you relate to that? And that's when things seem to happen, because that's when things happen to me. So I was walking to the door frame of the kitchen, thinking that people were in there. And when I got to the door frame, there was absolutely nobody in the kitchen. And I stood there completely bewildered and baffled and thought to myself, how on earth could I have heard something, but yet it's not here? And I thought I was absolutely losing it. Now, another thing that happened to me at the time is when I felt fearful, I started to sweat. And I started to feel in my stomach like it was tied up in knots. And I started to think to myself, I can't be in this place anymore, or this house anymore. It's bugging me. So they had this porch that was attached to the home and faced the street. And I would go out to the porch, even in sub-below zero weather, to stay out there and not go inside the house because it was just too creepy, and I felt like I had a faster way to run out of the house through the porch than through the kitchen door. All right, so did I ever say anything to my grandparents about this? A few years later, I did ask them. I said, do you think your house is haunted? And of course, my grandmother, no, not at all. And my grandfather just seemed like he wasn't a believer in that stuff. And they're diehard Catholics, and so they're quite religious, and probably never even thought about anything happening in that house as being an experience. Let's fast forward a little bit here, because now these things were happening, and I didn't want to stay in the house anymore, and I had to wait for my mother to come and pick me up after she was done with work, and I was simply freezing out in the porch area in the wintertime because they were gone, or whatever they were doing, and quite scary. Okay, so anyway, around my late 20s, young 30s, I decided at one point that I was going to go back to that house, because now they were, one was in a nursing home, I believe, at the time, and then my grandmother had passed away. I was going to go into that house by myself, and I was going to face my fear and tell myself that all of this stuff was in my head, and that nobody was going to convince me otherwise, that it was not something in my head. So I went over there, and I actually went upstairs, but with hesitation. There was a curtain at the top of the stairs that was meant to keep the cold drafts out from coming down, and that was actually a genius thing that they did. But do you know how terrifying it is to go into a house that you had experiences in, or made you really nervous and anxious and sweat and sick to your stomach, and to go back to face your fear, and the first thing you want to do is walk up the steps to go upstairs where there's a curtain that's covering the upstairs? I don't know what I was thinking, but I wasn't that brave. So I started going up the steps, of course slowly. I'm not going to sit there and run up them. And when you get to the top, you grab the curtain and you whoosh it back really, really fast, and then you hope that there's nothing standing there looking at you from the other side. So I made it that far, and I went up to the top, and I said, okay, now I made it this far. And I went into one of the rooms, and I felt really strange up there. I felt like something might have been up there, but then I kept saying to myself, this is all in my head, so just put it aside. All right, so I went into one of the rooms, a room, by the way, that when I was somewhere around age 9, 10, 11, stayed overnight at my grandparents' house with my sister, up in this, we called it the pink room. And I do recall back then, there were at the door shadow feet outside the door, and I thought that this might have been my grandparents wondering if we were still awake, and I remember calling out to them and hearing nothing. So there's nothing more creepy than laying in a bed in a strange house, but you're with your sister, and you're just lying there for the moment, and you roll over and you notice that there's these two shadow feet right underneath the door, and the light was on upstairs just in case we needed to, I suppose, come down and use the bathroom or something like that. And no response at all. So I rolled over and I put the covers actually over my head, and I tried really hard to go to sleep. Anyway, long story short, I think the next day, I asked them, when I was this young, I think I asked them if they came upstairs to see if we were sleeping or not, and there was no response on that. Okay, no response. Boy, seems like people just don't want to give a response these days, right? All right, fast forward. I'm in my 30s now. I'm in this house alone. I just pulled the curtain back. I just went into the pink room, and I sat on the bed. That's all I did. I just sat on the bed. There was a box of things that I was looking at, and I was just trying to say to myself, there's nothing up here. What's there to be afraid of? You slept up here. I'm trying to convince myself of things. But then all of a sudden, what happened kind of took me by surprise. All of a sudden, I started getting an incredible headache. And I started feeling really nauseous. And then I smelled something that smelled like something that was deceased. The only thing that you think of when you're younger is like mice or something along that lines, but I didn't smell it when I originally went into the room, but I started to smell it when I was sitting there. And boy, howdy, that smell was very, very overwhelming. The other thing I noticed, which was very interesting, is I took a look at the curtain. And the curtain had fire singes on the bottom, as if something were to have padded out what could have been a curtain on fire. And I thought, well, this is very strange. Why would they have a curtain up that has these fire markings, or what appears to be something putting out, a fire or something that started? I do recall that there was a lightning storm and I don't recall if it hit the house or not. But things are starting to get a little weird in there. So I'm sitting there, I've got this terrible headache, there's this awful ungodly smell that smelled like something deceased. I'm getting dizzy. I'm noticing that there's fire padded out on the curtain at the bottom, and I'm thinking to myself, am I alone, or is there somebody in here with me? Or am I smelling gas or something like that needs to be checked? Okay, there came a point where the jabs in the stomach was all I could stand. So that started too. So I got up and I ran out of that house. I must have jumped over 5 steps at a time as a kid, and I tore out of that house, shut the door, and I never returned by myself to that house for at least another couple years, when we had to go through and do the estate kind of pickings of things that were in there. That has never left my mind. However, I did some research on the house. What I discovered was that back just before the house was sold, there actually was a fire that occurred in the kitchen area, the kitchen porch area. So there used to be a porch in the kitchen area, and the porch that I stayed in was in the living room area. So there's 2 porches, but the one that was in the kitchen area wasn't there anymore, but they used to have a porch there. A woman apparently who lived in the house, and I'm not sure if she was by herself, caught on fire in the kitchen and died. So she died in that house. I don't know her name, but that would be fascinating for me to go back to at least find that much out. I can't even remember how I found that out, but somehow it came to me, or somehow someone told me about it. All right, so now I'm putting 2 and 2 together. I'm thinking to myself, chattering in the kitchen, loud noises, sounds like a party, curtain upstairs, fire singes on the bottom of the curtain, somebody that could still have been existing, and not only that, these shadowy feet prints that were underneath the door where no one ever responded. I'm now putting all of this together, and I am not the only person in my family as a kid that noticed that something felt a little off in that house. But no one would ever admit. My mother, my grandmother, my grandfather, you didn't talk to him about that stuff, but nope, no one ever said my house could be haunted. Sometimes when you live in your own house, you don't see things, so you don't feel things, because you are the energy and the presence in that house. So it's very possible that they didn't ever experience anything. However, it's also possible that they did, but they discounted it as something else. Very interesting, huh? So when we had Pickings Day from their estate, there were a couple crazy things that happened that can never be explained. Something that also wanted to hang around during that day, or better yet, was it something that I was also doing that I didn't realize? Let me explain. So my sister had noticed on their bed, in their bedroom, a music box. She tells me that the music box went off, but yet nobody touched the bed, nobody touched the box. It just all of a sudden started to play. That freaked her out, I think, and then I don't know if she went to another room or whatever at that point, but that kind of weirded her out a little bit. Here's something even a little bit more weird and strange. We were standing and looking at tables of all kinds of items, of course. I noticed there was a jar, and keep in mind, I come from a large family, and any of you out there that can relate to this, I'm sure you can in some way. My grandfather saved us all kinds of dental bills by taking a wrench or whatever, a string or whatever you want to talk about, and pulling out the teeth, our teeth that was about ready to fall out but wouldn't fall out. And so he was always Mr. Dentist, it seemed like, and we just hated it because he would come in there and he would, and it's just kind of like, oh God. But the thing that interested me, so what happened with these baby teeth is they kept all these baby teeth in a jar, and at that time there was probably maybe, 5 or 6 of us young kids in my family, and all our teeth are mixed up, and they've been put into a jar, and that's where they stayed for years and years and years. To this day, I'm not even sure what happened to that jar. Well, anyway, I'm standing by a table, and I'm looking at stuff, and when you're young, you don't know what to pick out. I mean, it's just like, do I pick this, and this? You don't know what to pick. All right, so I noticed the jar of baby teeth, and I made a comment. And the comment was, why on earth do they keep these baby teeth? I don't know if I said disgusting or gross or something like that. And as God is my witness, and I kid you not on this is a true thing that happened. The baby jar with the teeth in it jumped on its own. There was no movement. We were all just standing very still. So there was absolutely no movement and no vibration, by the way, that would have caused the jumping of this jar with the baby teeth. And it actually came toward me. And I thought, oh my God, how you just get like startled. I said, I'm not touching these baby teeth. And I just, I don't think I even really brought it to anyone's attention. I've told people about it once in a while, but I just took the baby teeth and I thought, okay, well, maybe there's a vibration in here. Or did I somehow have a connection with that bottle? And because I am psychokinetic, given the right conditions, I can move things from what I know of myself. Did I actually move that baby jar full of teeth, or did something that started the music box want me to know that, and my sister to know, that there was a presence on that day? You know what? It could have been my grandmother. I'm not even sure. I'm not sure if because some of these things were important to them back in the day, and it is very possible that the one that threw the baby jar at me or whatever after I noticed it could could have possibly been my grandmother, or it could have been this ghostly negative. It was more negative, like angry sensation or energy that was flitting around the house. I don't know. But I do know that some of these things just seem too quirky and very interesting. So now we've had all of these experiences up to this point. I was physically attacked in this home. Now I go back to my dad's and my grandparents' property. And what had happened around my 30s still, there was a tornado or a straight line wind that actually ripped through the rural area of which this house lived in. Very common, very typical. But what I always found really strange and really interesting was that the trees, there's a 200-year-old tree, and a lot of these trees fell over, literally, but nothing ever touched that house. Nothing. The windows were never broken. No, the shingles were still on the roof, but everything around it was kind of down. There was a power line that was down, and you know that sound when it kind of sizzles and you can hear the energy in the air or something radiating. That's what I heard. So I had to be very, very careful where I stepped, because I was there by myself, and I took my camera just to see if there was any damage to the house so I could report it to my dad. And I wasn't there very long, because once again, remember, this is the property I wish to have seen a ghost on. So I was going around the house, and the house itself was locked, and I would have been too scared to go into that house by myself, because remember, the creep factor was about 10 out of 10, and there was no way that I wanted to go into that house by myself. No way, no how. And I always had my dad go in there with me afterwards, because I was just that creeped out. Long story short, I was taking pictures, and I noticed nothing at the time, and I photographed the home, and then all of a sudden I heard a really unusual or not unusual sound. There was no sound. It was dead quiet. That's what got me all of a sudden too. I have noticed in my life that when I'm in situations that have no sound, literally anywhere, that's kind of a situation where you're not alone either. It's very interesting. The birds weren't chirping. It was like I was standing in a hole, or I was standing in something surrounding me that wouldn't allow any sound to come near me. It was very interesting. So I brought my film, a regular print film camera, because I have the image on the negative, and I still have the negative. And they printed off the pictures. And I noticed in the upper window, I said, well, how did a ball get up and stay in that upper window? What's in that upper window up there? Because I thought the house was clear. Who missed that? What is that? Well, that's when I got my first laptop, and I blew the picture up. And what it was, believe it or not, was a little girl and an older man, and they're both looking right at me. And I show this picture all the time, and it's also on the internet. You can find it if you want to look at it. I show it at conferences. And the little girl looked like she was around 6 years old, 7 years old, something like that. The older man looked like he was in his later 70s. And I said, oh my word, what on earth? I said, apparitions. It really was haunted. I actually, for the first time since age 14 or something like that, when I wished to have seen a ghost on that property, I photographed two. Probably the most famous now, because I told them out loud, you're going to be famous. But anyway, I went back after I noticed this the next day. I stood on the lawn and I looked up at the window. Now, I have to tell you that the window is a screen. It's not a glass plate window. All the trees were down. It would have been impossible for anything to have reflected in the manner in which it did, and I ran it through 100 filters, and sure enough, still a little girl and an older man who had a mustache, glasses, chin, forehead, a little bit of hair. The girl, part down the middle, smiling right at me, and guess what? Had the face of course, my family, or like my dad's side of the family. Very recognizable who that little girl was. Unfortunately, though, I had said, "Why did you come to me? You showed to me. Do you have a message for me?" And this is when I learned I was telepathic. The message was that the genealogy was wrong. And I said, and it wasn't male that came to me, it wasn't female. It just sounded like a voice. It said, the name of the little girl in the genealogy is wrong. And sure enough, guess what? It was. The little girl's name was Mary, and I identified her as Lily because for years and years and years and years and years, I wanted to see this foster child, Lily, that my great-grandfather adopted back in the day, and she also passed away at a very early age, so I thought that that was her, but it wasn't, and due to the part down the middle and the face and everything, and I managed to match up the face, it was Mary after all. And ever since that moment, by the way, I never was able to recapture them in any manner ever again, but I believe once in a while her energy plays in that house. Now I've got to also tell you, she didn't die in that house. She died 2 miles down the road. So then I had a couple readings done to try to figure out who the older man was that was above her. One person said that was her doctor because the doctor was distraught. She died around the age of 10 and he couldn't save her, and he just absolutely was distraught. The other one said, that is your great-grandfather, the one who she travels with periodically and to the house. Now, that house was burned down. It had to be burned down a couple years ago. It was rotting, it was still a tough house, but it was rotting. But I spent many, many, many times over there ghost hunting, searching, whatever you want to call it, and had other experiences there, not just the little girl and the man, but it seemed like, to me, it attracted energies from various places as well, including inside the barn. And on this note, there is more yet to come. And next week, we will continue this discussion. We will probably bring in a paranormal topic. We could actually have a guest that joins us. And so on that note, we will continue this discussion. Have a great day, and don't forget to join us next week. Thank you for watching and listening to Paranormal Latte Podcast. We have been broadcasting on the United Public Radio and UFO Paranormal Radio Networks, 105.3 FM from the Gulf Coast and 107.7 FM in New Orleans, as well as several listening platforms. The content, music, and creative sound effects as heard on Paranormal Latte Podcast are copyrighted and licensed commercially to Dr. Kelly Renee Schutz. Please do not reproduce in any manner without the express permission of Dr. Kelly Renee Schutz, Diamond Point Entertainment, LLC, Paranormal Universal Press, LLC, Paranormal Latte Podcast, and or any affiliated networks such as the United Public Radio and UFO Paranormal Networks. The opinions and information expressed by the guests, hosts, and sources as heard and seen on the Paranormal Latte Podcast are not necessarily those of Diamond Point Entertainment, LLC, Paranormal Universal Press, LLC, Paranormal Latte Podcast, and the United Public Radio and UFO Paranormal Networks, as well as their producers. Although the content of the shows may be interesting, the information and opinions within are deemed for entertainment purposes only. Subscribe to continue your enjoyment and interest, and thank you for making Paranormal Latte podcast part of your day. Now that was good.